Hello everybody, I'm Dr. Erica Lacher from Spring Hill Equine Veterinary Clinic and the podcast Straight from the Horse Doctor's Mouth. Today we're going to talk about barn design from a veterinarian standpoint.
Live it up, sweet emotion. Every time, every night, you and I on a roll. Switch it up where I'm going. Stay on the fly just in time, know the right way to go. I'm on the road, it's my time.
So the first thing your veterinarian wants you to know about your barn design is that it should be designed for airflow. That is the number one thing that horses want in a barn design. Everything else is just icing on the cake, but for them, airflow is key. That has a lot to do with disease management, happy horses, all of the things, you name it, airflow, airflow, airflow. So we're at the clinic to start out a little bit on airflow and how this barn was designed for around that, even though it is our hospital barn. So the first thing that we can talk about is that the aisleway is 14 feet wide. And that is so that the aisleway can pick up maximum breezes as they blow through. We also oriented the barn east to west. And in most locations, that is the orientation you want a building if you're trying to pick up breezes. If you look at a lot of like poultry houses, things like that, they are oriented east-west, and that is so that when you want to utilize good airflow, you can. So I realize not everyone lives in sunny Florida, but no matter what, you're going to want to have your barn open as much as possible, and having an east-west orientation does that. The other thing that it does is minimizes the amount of your roof that is exposed to direct sunlight, because only your southern facing roof is exposed to direct sunlight, not your entire roof. So again, I realize we're in Florida, but for most buildings that are used to house animals, that is appropriate. Okay, so the next thing about airflow, not only having a wide aisleway to pick it up, east-west orientation, but you want to make sure that your stalls are all set so that air can flow up. This helps ammonia move up and out of the stall, which is good for health reasons, and it just helps bring fresh air into the stalls and has it go out the top of the building. So when we go in the stall, you'll see, but the roof of these stalls is open and up to an area where there's two cupolas on the top of this barn. So you always want to be looking for where do we have airflow up and out. And again, this is true no matter what your climate, unless you're living in Antarctica. And I don't think there's many horses in Antarctica, but you've always got to be thinking about airflow. So here in Florida, we also design our barns based around the primary temperature that we want to manage for. And in Florida, obviously that's hot temperatures. In northern climates, you may want to look at cold. But again, we look for airflow basically 365, and we're going to have a few days of the year when we're really cold in here, but for the most part we're going for how do we get it flowing. If you live in a climate where it does in fact get actually cold, and I do mean actually cold, not what I consider cold, but if you do live in a climate that it gets actually cold, you can set your doors such that they can close and have insulation on them, and your outer walls have insulation, those sorts of things. But you want to make sure that your barn never closes up super tight, because that actually is not really great for the horses. So the aisleway being wide. So the aisleway being wide has another benefit besides airflow. This aisleway is 14 foot wide, as is the aisleway at our barn. At home, that is totally by design. One of the things you get as a veterinarian is that you drive around all over the place and you see barns and you see what doesn't work. What I can tell you is a 14-foot aisleway allows me to bring my vet truck into your aisleway. If in Florida there's a hurricane going on, if up north there's a blizzard going on, no matter what the weather is outside, it allows me to bring my vehicle into the aisleway and open the doors and do the things I need, get the equipment out I need to work on a horse in the barn, no matter what's going on outside. The number of times it's just super convenient to bring the vet truck into the aisleway, it's amazing. And if I want to bring the vet truck in, I'm sure you as owners have reasons sometimes that you'd like to bring your vehicles in too. Let's say unloading hay, and the closer you can get it to where that's supposed to go, the better. Electricity in the barn. A couple things about electricity in the barn. One, make sure there is an electrician involved in putting the electricity in your barn. Most barn fires are caused by electricity in some way, shape, or form. We'll talk about fans in a moment, but electricity just needs to be super safe. On that note though, you always want to have more than you need. Now again, this is the hospital barn, but the home barn is pretty similar. I put a lot of electricity in there, but there are outlets everywhere. So this is 2 stalls right here, 4 outlets, not to mention there's actually 2 outlets up in the ceiling of the stalls behind you. That's for some medical equipment stuff, but you know, we took what outlets we thought we'd need and then we doubled it. There's also a spigot between these 2 stalls for efficiency for taking care of these horses. We've got a spigot here, hose here. We can water 2 horses at the same time from the same place. There's no extra steps involved. So this contributes to efficiency a little bit, but it also just makes everything, you know, easier to get to when you need it in a crisis. And what horse doesn't love to create a crisis? All right, speaking of electricity, like I said, we have outlets in here and they're located where we want fans. If you're a place that needs bucket heaters, something like that, think about where you can put your electricity that'll be good for having your bucket heaters plugged in directly to an outlet, your fans plugged in directly to an outlet. The less you do with extension cords, the less your chance of barn fires. The other thing we have in here is a specifically designed sealed outdoor fan. If you notice, that is not a $5 box fan from Walmart. That is about $100 sealed, made for outdoor harsh environment fan. You can also look at ceiling fans. Like at home, we've got ceiling fans instead. I like the ceiling fans at home in particular because they're a lot quieter. So it keeps the barn from being quite so noisy with all the fans going off. But again, we use ceiling fans designed to be used in dairy barns. So the motors are sealed, they can handle all of the heat, the humidity, the ammonia, all of the dust, the nasty things that happen in a barn. So be very aware that you're looking at those. I will say again, from a veterinary standpoint, I will appreciate having a fan when it's really hot out and I'm working on your horse. It does make my life a lot nicer, but it also does a lot for airflow. So the asthmatic horse, the fan does a great job pushing ammonia out. Ammonia is a relatively light molecule, and so a little bit of airflow really moves it out of the stall. Every horse has ammonia in their stall, even when you keep them meticulously clean. It's just part of urination, it happens. So airflow is super important there. If you're at a horse show, airflow is really great for keeping viral and bacterial pathogens from the airways moving along and not settling in your horse's stall. There's just a lot of things that fans bring to the table, even if it's not necessarily the hottest day of the year. We often have the fans going if we've got a horse in a stall here. Next thing we can look at here is that we went concrete. There are pros and cons to concrete and wood. From a disease standpoint, concrete is your best bet. It's the easiest to clean. We can actually get these walls basically sanitized. And because this is a hospital barn, that's a big deal. The other thing you'll notice about our concrete walls is they're solid. And I do recommend this when people ask me about building a barn. Even if it's your home barn, having solid walls between your stalls will minimize disease spread if you're ever in a disease situation. So I realize for airflow, which I'm stressing, open walls would be better. Solid walls are absolutely fantastic at cutting down on disease spread. Now, human hands and hoses are really good at disease spread, but a good sneeze from the other side of this wall to here, and whatever that horse had, this horse has. So that's why we've got solid walls in here. Next thing we're gonna look at is how some of the things are attached that we've designed. So if you notice, our bucket hanger is attached with wood to the concrete. And that is because things don't attach well to concrete directly without having a bit of a buffer in between. The other nice thing is if some horse comes in here and decides that they would like to rip off their water bucket hanger, not that they would ever do that, then all we have to do is kind of move over and down and reattach it. So we've tried to make our lives easier for reattachment purposes. Other thing you'll notice about our bucket hangers, and this is how to keep your veterinarian happy on Saturday night, is while I don't doubt that a horse could lacerate themselves on this type of water bucket hanger, it's harder. So we've tried to up the ante and make it a little bit difficult. I'm sure they all see it as a challenge. And again, we've done the same thing here. We've just looked at, we had trouble. We hang hay bags for the hospital horses. and it was digging into the concrete here. So this board is here so it can dig into the concrete, and we've got something easily replaceable. The next thing we have in this stall that is from a combination of disease and comfort is, if we look at the ground, we've got stall mats. In my first barn that I built for myself when I grew up and had to move away and no longer had someone to cook and do my laundry for me, that barn had dirt floors, and everyone always told me stall mats will pay for themselves, and I was a poor college kid, like I couldn't afford stall mats. But I will tell you, stall mats pay for themselves. When I moved to the next place, I put stall mats in, and holy cow, do they pay for themselves in bedding savings in a heartbeat. So we have in here, we have there's 6 mats that cover a stall, and that's because, again, in this barn, we pull the mats up periodically, or if we've got a horse that's had a severe like diarrheal disease, the mats will get pulled out and the stall will get fully cleaned. The one thing I do not recommend that we have here that is really, it's hard on our legs for sure, is that underneath these mats is concrete. We did that again from a disease standpoint, but I would highly recommend that you do some sort of crushed stone. For one thing, it is definitely harder to stand on. The other thing that happens is the urine goes through the mats and it will sit on the concrete. Eventually it soaks in, but it definitely sits on the concrete more than it does on like our home barn has crushed lime rock underneath. The big advantage though is that this concrete was flat, so I didn't have to deal with the princess and the pea problem that one has with stall mats, where the surface must be perfectly flat for them to lay flat. There are some great products out there that get around that now. One of them is called Stall Skins. We're going to have a bit from World Equestrian Center, and if you want to go the deluxe version, they have stall mattresses, and those also are fully sealed. So if you have concrete floors in a building and you want to turn it into a barn, the stall mattresses, I would say, are a great way to go because they do have cush. In general, I would say the stall mattresses are a great way to go because they are pretty darn deluxe. But mats on concrete, not the end of the world, but again, it was harder than I ever thought it would be until I've lived in this barn for the last 11 years. So there we go, stall mats. All right, we're gonna look at the ceiling here again because we're gonna look at, first off, there's a lot of light in here. Your veterinarian absolutely wants you to have a lot of light. When you think you have enough, have more. Take your 45-year-old eyes and grab a newspaper and see if you can read it in every corner of the stall, and that will tell you that you have enough light to keep your veterinarian happy. The other thing is this ceiling is open, and this ceiling goes up and then goes out to, there are 2 cupolas. So this is basically a 4-stall barn, and it has 2 cupolas. You want to look at your up airflow and see if there's a way for you to get either a ton of it or see if you can add attic fans, things like that, to increase the flow up. Again, all of this airflow is designed from a disease standpoint, but also to move ammonia up and out of a barn. Ammonia rises, and the more you can help that process, the happier everyone is. Okay, we're at the home barn, which you guys have seen from the other side, since that's where most of our videos have been shot from. But on this side, I want to talk about a few features that this barn was designed with specifically for airflow. And the biggest thing is the kind of side roof here. An advantage it has is we can store equipment under it, like the tractor, and it stays out of the weather for the most part. But the big thing it's actually there for is to keep the southern sun off of the outside wall of those stalls and to cool the air as it comes in the enormous windows. So those are some things that are here because we live in Florida and airflow is super important. You can see that there's that huge window that's on the back of each stall, and that window, I obviously don't have a way to shut it because winter here gets to about 30 degrees for a few hours for a few days. So airflow, airflow, airflow. The other thing those windows do is bring in a lot of natural light and make the stalls very open and airy so that the horses don't feel as confined. Especially in their home environment, I think it's really important, if at all possible, to make stalls be as open and airy as possible for horses so that they feel like they can see other horses, they can see outside, and they don't feel like they're in a prison cell. Again, this is the home barn, so I try to make sure that I'm set up for any situation. And one of the things that is part of that is a generator. I was a little late to the solar panel. Well, I actually built the barn a little early for the solar panel option, but my next door neighbor actually has solar panels on the roof of her barn with a battery system. And all of it is for the same reason, that if power goes out, we've still got the ability to mostly get water to the horses on a regular basis, but also that we've got lights and electricity. So that's nice, because heaven forbid they don't have their fans when it's hot out. So we've got the generator. The other thing behind me is the ramp coming out, and that has a bit to do with water and mud management. The more you can keep an area dry, anywhere that there's water, we're going to talk about that in another area of the barn here, but the more you can manage those areas to keep them dry, the better you'll do from a fly control standpoint. I mean, nobody likes mud for obvious reasons. It's horrible on the skin, it's awful for feet, it's awful for shoes. But one of the big things that wet areas do around a barn is give flies a great place to have babies, and we do not want to encourage that. These stalls also have 2 sets of doors. So there's a door on the inside, and then there is a Dutch door on the outside. It was built originally with the intention that we could take the top doors off the Dutch doors, but it turned out to be a giant pain in the behind, so they're on. But it would allow me to have the entire back of the stall basically open. The other reason for the Dutch doors is the safety standpoint. So for a fire, God forbid, but for fire, it gives us another exit out of the stall, so another way for us to get the horses out. The other reason, and this is part of being a veterinarian that I have faced this many times, is that if I have a horse that is down in a stall and I need to get them out, I have 2 different options in these stalls for how I can get horses out that are down. Now, right now you see we'd have to move some equipment around, but it's not a lot of stuff that we would have to move in order to be able to use these back doors to get horses out of stalls. Speaking of water management, this is the wash rack area in our barn. And a couple of things we've done. When the barn was built, we put crushed rock around the edges. That has now filled in with dirt and debris, which is fine, but the water still really drains. It's minimal people here, right? Like it's only me, so it's 1, maybe 2 washes a day. So it's not a huge amount of water, and this system tolerates it well. But if you've got an area where you're washing horse after horse after horse after horse, you really want to pay attention to how your water flows, because there's nothing better for growing flies than this area right here that is moist. And what do horses do on cross ties? They poop. So you're going to add some organic debris, and that's everything that a fly wants to have babies. The thing about these cross ties, and this is just a little bit about the human side of barns, but they are located right next to the tack room and the feed room. So from a medication standpoint, I'm near any of my medications I keep at home. And from an efficiency standpoint, the tack room is right next door. So I think the fewer steps you can have when you're moving around as the human, I think that's the important part of barn design for humans. We of course want them warm or cool, mostly warm in the winter. And that is not ideal for horses. Little things that make life much, much, much better around here. Bright light right above me. So there's always tons of light if I need to work in this area as a veterinarian. I've got outlets conveniently located right here. Yes, I may have to use a small extension cord, but I've got electricity right here to do anything I need to do. And I've got a hose right here as well. I've also got, kind of a good base if I need to clean a wound. So I'm not in mud, I'm not in, a sand pit, I'm not in any of those sorts of things. I'm in an area where I can definitely take a wound and I can get it super clean if I need to. I've got all the things around me that I need to do that. So nice wide aisleway, 14 feet, just like the hospital aisle. You can easily drive a car in either end of this, even the truck, even the big truck fits in here. Tack room, and feed room are conveniently located for where we do most of the work on the horses. This is something that I think you should think about when you're designing a barn in terms of efficiency. For this one, there's only 4 stalls in that direction. But if you've got a big long barn aisle, you may want to consider putting your feed room somewhere in the center. I always think about how many steps it takes to do a process and try to design everything to minimize how many steps it takes. But again, this barn has been fully designed for airflow maximization first, human efficiency second, and overall horse happiness third. So here we have the door from the inside of the stall, and the door out is behind the camera. So they're catty corner from each other, which gives us the most options we can have in terms of trying to get a horse that's in here that's down out of the stall as easily as possible, which is never easy, and not things that most of us want to think about, but definitely a necessary thing to consider. The other thing is here's the windows from inside, and you can see they're really big. Now, again, if you are a barn up north, you may not want to have a window this big, but I think horses appreciate if they've got a spot where they can put their head out and generally see around their environment as much as they can. Again, went concrete block at home, just because of durability. To be honest, I was less worried about disease management. Wood can definitely be harder to get disease out of, but I feel like concrete block is just a more durable material for my purposes anyways. You can also see that I went light on the top, dark on the bottom in a somewhat attempt to hide all of the poop stains that they put on the bottom. No other reason than that, but keeping the stall light, at least on the top, so that it feels, again, light and airy for the horses is important. The other thing you'll notice is there are no extra lights on me right now other than the stall light, so we don't have any, extra floodlights or anything like that on right now. And this stall is very, very, very bright. And that is because I have been in so many very not bright stalls trying to suture up things. So please, from your veterinarian, have lots of light in your stalls. Okay, let's talk about barn design at the World Equestrian Center, which is pretty great, I'm not gonna lie. But let me talk about some of the things that I saw when I came here as a veterinarian to show that really blew me away in terms of management of horses. So you can't necessarily see, well, you can probably get from behind me, but these barns are huge, right? So they're very tall, they've got high ceilings, and there are doors out the end of each aisleway to allow for lots of airflow. There's doors on the end of this big long green aisleway, and right outside of those there's doors to the outside. So there's plenty of opportunities for cross ventilation. There's also big ass fans in the ceilings that if it's not, today's a little cold, but if it's not, you can turn those on, and let me tell you, you get fantastic airflow through here. And airflow, as we all know from COVID, is really bad for respiratory viruses, and that's true for horse respiratory viruses too. You think that's how they would be kind of picked up and spread. It happens a little bit that way, but by and large, respiratory viruses don't handle airflow very well at all. You can see there is a little bit of horse traffic back and forth here. That's going to happen at a horse show, and we can't do anything about it, but it is kept to very specific areas here, and it's designed that way, right? Like, so they've got what we call the green mile here that really runs horses through the barns, and then outside there are bridle paths that really kind of keep horses on paths. So your traffic is sort of directed. But the big thing that I saw when I looked at that stall design is, let's walk over to the aisleway and take a peek. And one of the big things, at the end of each aisleway, there's a spigot. So there's one on this side, there's one on that side. And there's one on the other end of this aisleway. So that means that there's very little hose sharing. And hose sharing is a great way to spread cooties. You take the hose, you dip it in the bucket, you take it back out, you go to the next stall, you dip it in the bucket. You want to talk about a great way to share respiratory cooties? Hoses are the way to do it. The next thing we see is that the aisles are blocked into relatively small chunks. So each aisleway has 8 stalls, and it does also have a tack room. But the way these are chunked, you can have small groups of horses in isolation from other groups, basically. So the walls are solid, which minimizes airflow from stall to stall. So we don't have noses touching, causing respiratory spread that way. And again, if we've got 3 horses, we can have them isolated on one side. If we've got 5, we can have them isolated. And the nice thing is that, again, minimizes cootie spread from training barn to training barn. Very difficult to minimize cootie spread between horses in the same barn. You know, you're always sharing tack, equipment, people, so that makes that difficult. But if you can minimize between different groups, that's fantastic. These stalls also have fans in them, so that's really great. For airflow, the fans in each stall are fantastic. They're really high speed, high volume fans, so they do a great job pushing air. But the stalls are also solid on 3 walls to prevent nose touching of horse to horse, but the fronts are very open so that they can see other horses in the area. So they don't get that, you know, like horses don't love to think that they're the only horse on the planet, which sometimes happens. They can see, but they're far enough apart that it really, it does a lot to help things. The aisleways are about 14 feet, which is nice to reduce direct sneeze spread of germs too. Influenza is our big troublemaker. It can really travel. So it's nearly impossible to design a horse show facility where influenza can't spread, but this one has done a pretty good job for the rest of the bugs. I'm gonna brag a minute on WEC's lovely mattress system, because I have to say this is one of the better designed versions I've seen. This is solid. So yes, liquids can't penetrate through it, but it is solid and squishy enough, so you don't really have to bed them as thickly as this stall is bedded to get horses what they need. You really just need to be able to soak up some urine. The other thing that's nice for a horse show facility is they are sealed up against the wall, so you can't have the organic material going down between the wall and the mat or getting under it. And again, that's really important. That organic material, it's nearly impossible to sterilize this, right? You can't put bleach on it. There's nothing you can do for this that will fully sterilize it. The bacteria will find little nooks and crannies to survive and live. So preventing it from being down between here really, really, really keeps bacteria and viruses from having a heyday in there. So again, lots of things that have been done right here at the World Equestrian Center. Let's talk about poop, because I have to say this is one of the things that they do fantastic here. Flies are also a great way to spread disease. They travel from horse to horse. You know, they get on a snotty nose and they pick up bacteria and viruses there. They travel to the next horse and they transmit that bacteria or virus to the next horse that way. Minimizing flies involves minimizing manure. So the sealed mattresses prevent that organic material from going down, so you don't have places for baby flies to live. And then all manure is put into these trash cans, which they then come by with a trash truck basically and pick them up. The key to these trash cans is a couple things. One, they're black, so if they're sitting out here in the sun, they get really, really hot, and the fly eggs don't like that. The other thing is they're covered, right? So they can't get in, or if they are in, they can't get out. The manure is also then hauled relatively far away from the horses on the same property, and it is then pelletized into like heater pellets that you put into like fireplace heaters. So they do a great job with the manure here in terms of turning it, reusing it into something useful, but also really, really, really minimizing flies. Most horse show facilities you go to, I find that there are flies everywhere and they are immune to every fly spray known to man. Here, there are very, very, very minimal flies. And I can't say enough good things about World Equestrian Center, but like I said, they've really nailed some of the really important things for horse health. Hope you guys have enjoyed this video that's a little bit about barn design from a veterinarian perspective, from disease management, fly control, what to do with poo, and how to design it so your veterinarian can work in and around your horses with safety, and your horses can stay as healthy as possible. I want to give a big thank you to our patrons. We can't do what we do without you guys, so thank you so much.
You always take me so high. You always make the